I'm Wim Vos. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Fluida, and we develop imaging biomarkers. Imaging biomarkers, you can see them a little bit as results or measures that you can take from a medical image, and we complement those medical images with flow simulations. Flow simulations are used massively in the development of new cars, airplanes, and what they actually do is they make a three-dimensional model of a certain geometry, and around that geometry you can simulate flow. The same technology can be used within humans. So if you start from a medical image and you reconstruct airway trees, you can use those airway trees to simulate how a person is breathing or how particles are delivered within the lungs. So the functional respiratory imaging starts from CT images that are taken on a patient-specific level. The CT images are taken at two different lung levels, at full inspiration and at normal expiration. From those models we can reconstruct the airway tree, but since we have images at two levels and we can look at low volumes at the two levels, we know how air is distributing within the lung. Using that information together, we can simulate flow on a patient-specific airway geometry with patient-specific boundary conditions. And it gives a very valuable measure on how a patient is feeling, but not only how it's on the global level, but you can really look in detail how regional changes or regional disease expression influences certain outcome parameters that the patient is really feeling during its day-to-day breathing. You only need the patient for the time of the CT scan. During that time, all the information that is needed is collected, and afterwards those models can be used to simulate a whole ton of different scenarios. For example, you can look at how one inhaler would cause a certain deposition, but you can also switch that inhaler virtually without any need of the patient to be involved to see how a switch from one drug to another would influence the patient deposition patterns. Our work is on the macro scale level, and the other work packages go more down to the micro scale. So while we measure things at organ level, we can also couple the models that we have with smaller models that measure things or can simulate things on the tissue level or the cell level. And using that information, actually when you know where treatment is reaching, you can use those models to predict how the lung volume or the airway volume would change and how that would influence the macro scale model and hence the lung function of the patient. The big added value is very clear. The big added value from these modeling techniques based on imaging is that you open the black box that the lung is. The lung function parameters that have been used for the last 60 years in clinical trials, they are very valuable when you measure regions that contribute to the parameter that you're measuring. But in the lung there might be a lot of regions which are not measurable by those techniques and they're a bit hidden. And those are the parameters that are probably predictive for future events such as exacerbation or current drops in lung function. And imaging and modeling on a regional level will definitely give you more information on those scales. So I think that the imaging, by giving more information on the local level, will complement the lung function measures, and it will allow certain type of treatments that are working on a level that is not directly identifiable by the lung function. It will be identified by the functional respiratory imaging because of the local nature of the technology. You will see those changes, and hence you will get better drugs to market and you will better identify the correct patients for those drugs. So in the end you will get a better treatment for the patient overall. Within AirPROM, we have used it on retrospective data to correlate the clinical measures that are more a black box measure of the lung with these more detailed regional measurements that we can obtain with the imaging and the flow simulations. So that's one thing that we have done. Currently we're using it in a clinical trial where we are using the functional respiratory imaging outcome parameters to look at the effect of a treatment in patients. Within AirPROM, there's not only modeling on the macro scale, there's also modeling on the micro scale within different work packages. And we are also trying with the other groups to combine those into one big model. And that big model that really goes from the organ level to the tissue level, you could simulate flow, but you could also include the tissue models to predict the efficacy of certain treatments and how they would change the geometry of the lungs and how that in its turn would change the lung function of the patients.